Thanks very much, folks, and welcome to the Raith Suite at Starks Park, the home of Raith Rovers Football Club and the home of Raith women and girls as well, now that some of your teams are playing on our pitch. I want to thank you all for coming tonight. I'm sure you're going to have a really interesting night, and a special welcome to both of our special guests who I'm about to introduce to you. I'm going to start firstly with the First Minister of Scotland. Now, what does that tell you? It tells you she's the top person in Scotland, right? The First Minister. Nicola Sturgeon, MSP, Member of the Scottish Parliament. She occupies the highest job in politics in the whole country of Scotland, and that means that she's responsible for everything. She's no spare time, apart from coming along to meet you. What she's responsible for is all the services like education, health, the police, the fire, everything else like that. All the private sector things like the economy, how do we make money in Scotland and make it prosperous. She's also responsible for speaking to people from foreign countries. And in fact, she spoke to one of them yesterday. You may have seen it on television, a strange man with white hair who appeared in Edinburgh yesterday. So she's done a lot of things, and she's risen up through the political world. Before that, she was a lawyer, but she started off as a wee lassie in the primary school in Ayrshire. And look where she's got to now. Fantastic. So we're going to hear a lot from Nicola about how she did that, how she had a job in law, first of all, and then how she got involved in politics and came on right up through the ranks to be the First Minister. She's also, I should add, a great supporter of women's and girls' rights and gender equality, that girls should be equal with boys in every respect and that women should be equal with men. And for that, she's to be applauded, I think. So that's Nicola. Do you want to come up and take your seat just now, Nicola? Please. The First Minister. Now, the second very special guest that we've got tonight is Val McDermid. And some of you who've been around the pitch here will have seen the Val McDermid stand. Val is a world-famous, best-selling author of crime novels. She has designed murders in many different places, but she's actually managed to solve quite a few of them as well in her books. And as you grow up, I hope that you will read many of her books. She's also a former director of Raith Rovers Football Club. So, like the First Minister, she knows her football, and we'll hear a wee bit about football, I think, tonight on the back of the Women's World Cup and so on. Former pupil of Kirkcaldy High School. Some of you may be pupils at Kirkcaldy High School or might be going there in the near future. And she was the first girl from a Scottish state school to be admitted to college in Oxford University. That was a first. And we're going to hear this word first quite a lot, I think, tonight from both our speakers. She also, beyond that, has the distinction of being the lead singer in the Crime Writers Band, which actually played this year at Glastonbury at the festival. Some of you may have seen that on television. And there's the proof she's got the band round her there. So I'm sure that you're going to find tonight, when Val comes up and joins me now, you're going to find tonight, I'm sure, interesting, challenging, make you think, but most of all, with the two special guests we've got, I think you will find it an inspiration tonight to listen to their stories coming from wee primary schools, secondary schools, Ayrshire, Kirkcaldy, and where they are now. And so I'll hand over to Val to start the proceedings off. Over to you, Val.
Thank you, Bill. Well, it's a great pleasure and a privilege to be here tonight and to see all your happy, smiling faces. You don't often see happy, smiling faces in the Raith Suite, I have to say. Certainly not after the game quite often. But anyway, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm absolutely delighted Nicola, to welcome you here to Starks Park for the first time, I believe.
It is the first time I've been in Raith Rovers, hopefully not the last time.
Good, you're always welcome.
Thank you.
You can come and sit in seats next to us, and there's season tickets.
We'll let you come and sit. I get a McDermid shirt as well.
I'll
be excommunicated from my family, but my father if I do.
But that's okay. Yeah. I'm sure he'll forgive you, because we all know how important football is. And people often talk about the football family, and I think that for me, this year's experience of watching Scotland playing in the World Cup in France was an example of that. I know you went to the first game, didn't you? One in Nice. What was your experience of that?
It was brilliant. I'm the patron of the women's football team, so I've been involved with the team for quite a wee while as they were getting prepared for the World Cup, and the build-up was great. The support the team got was fantastic, and then being in Nice for the match against England was just really exciting. And I know how much it meant to the players that there was so many people there supporting them. Obviously, the result didn't go the way we wanted it to, but I'd seen them play England 2 years previously in the European Championships, and we got beaten 6-0 in that game. So to lose 2-1 was a bit of an improvement, I think. So I thought it was brilliant, and I thought the World Cup generally really did change a lot of attitudes towards women's football, even amongst some men who'd been very dismissive of it in the past. Suddenly realised that actually it's high quality, it's really entertaining, and it's good to watch. So I think the World Cup was fantastic.
Yeah. We went to the game in Paris at the Paris Saint-Germain Stadium, which is a big stadium. There's 28,000 people in that stadium, and the atmosphere was absolutely electric, especially when Scotland started doing so well. And then, of course, in the end, we were robbed.
Yeah, we was robbed.
And I know people sort of say, oh, well, you always whine about when you lose, or in this case, when you draw. But genuinely, this was a bad refereeing decision. People talk about the VAR being against us, but it should never have come to the VAR, because the whole move that led to that supposed penalty was an illegal move, because they shouldn't have had the free kick when we were in the middle of doing a substitution. So the whole game should have been brought back to that free kick, and then the whole VAR question would never have arisen. But having said that, from the point of view of a fan and a supporter, we stand in the stands, and we can see these things and we can say these things. One of the things that I was most proud of that night was the way that the Scottish women did not object, did not create a fuss. They behaved with respect and with dignity, even though they were clearly in a situation where they had been robbed of a result. And I was really proud of that behaviour on the pitch. And I know that as players, you all have to think about, there are times when things happen on the pitch that drive you completely mad, and you want to shout and scream and stamp your feet and rage at somebody, but you just have to hold it in till you get back to the dressing room, and then you can all do it together.
But that's one of the good things, I think, watching the women's game. I was talking to one of the girls out in the pitch a wee while ago about this. There's not the same sort of diving and rolling about the pitch and gamesmanship that you see in the men's game. There is a bit more just playing the game and a bit more dignity, but it must have been... I hadn't stopped watching. We were 3-0 up, and then went 3-2. Lost 2 goals, and then the penalty. I had to leave the room. I just couldn't watch anymore. And my husband shouted, "She saved the penalty!" And I came back through, and then it was. But the whole thing was. It's a very Scottish thing to say we was robbed, and if only this had happened and that had happened. But we definitely were robbed in that match.
And there was a family in front of us. There was a wee boy there, and it was his first time to watch a Scottish international. And poor wee soul, he was just in floods of tears at the end.
It's good practice for the lifetime.
Yeah, that's it. Especially following the men's team, really.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully that will change. I think the women's team, will go from strength to strength. Yeah. Some of you might be in it one day, hopefully. Yeah. Many of you might be in it one day.
It's only 2 years to the Euros, and I think we've learned a lot from this tournament to go forward from that.
I think the first qualification game for the Euros is in August, actually, so that will start all over again.
So when we were these lassies' age, I mean, I certainly would never have imagined a women's football World Cup. Because when I was at school, there was no option to play football for girls. When I was wee, I'd play football in the street with girls and boys would just play together. Would play up the play park, would play up the Beveridge Park. jumpers for goalposts kind of thing, and there was no thing about girls can't play. And then you go to secondary school, and suddenly it was like, no, girls don't play football. Don't be ridiculous. You're playing hockey, and that was that. There was no choice, and I remember being quite heartbroken about that, really. And I never imagined there would come a time when there would be a Scottish women's team in a World Cup that would be watched all around the world by millions of people.
Yeah. It was even probably worse than that in my school. Even in my primary school, there was just no real suggestion that girls would play football. Not even in the playground. We tended to kind of leave the boys to that and go off and do...
But harder than Fife.
Other things, clearly. A lot harder than Fife. We're pretty hard in Ayrshire as well, to be fair. But so any girl, when I was at school, primary or secondary school, that had shown an interest in football would immediately have been slagged off, made a fool of. There would have been something wrong with them. And it's great to see that change. And it's been changing for a while, but it's really, I think that process of change is accelerating. But any sport, I mean, I was never, I know you can't tell, but I was never very sporty when I was younger or now. But there was never really any sort of expectation that as a girl, you could, even hockey or netball, that you could follow a career in sport. At best, it was something you did as a pastime. And I think I'm going to Sturgeon Val earlier on, the hockey European Championships are in Glasgow starting this weekend, and I'm going to see Scotland play hockey on Sunday. So across a lot of different sports now, it's absolutely possible for girls to have careers. It's not just a hobby, it's something they can follow and do professionally. And
that has been a transformation. I mean, I remember when I was growing up, the only women I can think of that you ever saw prominently in professional sport was the 2 weeks of Wimbledon. And you see the women players there like Billie Jean and Martina and Betty Stova and these kind of people, Margaret Court. You'd see these people on the telly playing a sport. But that wasn't, I mean, certainly there is a tennis club in Kirkcaldy, but it wasn't something that most people would even contemplate playing. It was one of those things that was regarded for people no like us. And I think that sort of brings me around to, I suppose, a way of looking at our careers as well. I mean, you see us sitting here. Nicola's the First Minister of Scotland. Nicola talks to statesmen, leaders of other countries in Europe and all around the world. And Boris Johnson. As equals, or in Boris Johnson's case, a superior. And I, as Bill said, I have an international career. I've won awards in various countries. My books are international bestsellers. So you see us sitting here as people who've been introduced to you tonight as special. But we started off like you. We started off in ordinary towns in Scotland, very ordinary lives. My family were very much working class. My big start, I suppose, in life came because when I was 6, we moved house to live opposite Kirkcaldy Library. And the library became really my home from home. And I just read my way around the shelves of Kirkcaldy Library. And that was the first wee bit of a door opening of opportunity to me. And it made me think I wanted to spread my wings a bit further and maybe have wider horizons. And I wanted to be a writer from a very early age. I think what did it for me was I used to read these books called the Chalet School books, which are about a boarding school in Switzerland. I remember coming home to my parents one night and saying, "Why can I not go to a boarding school in Switzerland?" They just about fell off their chairs laughing. But one of the things that happened in these books is that over the years, characters grew up and went out into the world and had careers, and one of them became a writer. And I remember one book, she got a letter from her publisher with a cheque in it, and that was the moment where I realised, oh my God, you get paid money for this. I can do that. I can tell lies. And
you mean not everything in your books is true?
Not all of it. Yeah. Just most of it. just the murders. And that was the point where I realised that was something people did for a living. They made money, and I think that was the point where I decided I wanted to be a writer. And I spent most of my teens being told people like us don't do things like that. All my life, that's been one of the echoes I've heard again and again. People like us don't do things like that. You should know your place. And I was lucky that I came from a household where I was encouraged to dream and to dream big. And my parents both encouraged me to kind of what they saw as bettering myself, and not to accept no. not to listen to people who said you can't do things like this. My dad was always a great believer that that the only person standing between you and your dreams was yourself. And that's something that he certainly imbued me with at an early age. And I've spent my life being a difficult, awkward bism who's refused to take no for an answer.
All of that, I think, is perfectly true. Yeah. But I've got a very similar kind of background. I mean, you know, Fife, Ayrshire, lots of similarities. The kind of town I grew up in is probably very similar in many ways to Kirkcaldy. Nobody in my family had gone to university. I probably was at secondary school, maybe even before I'd really met properly anybody that had been to university. And yet from a very young age, I knew that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a lawyer. I think I wanted to be a lawyer before I even really properly knew what that was. And
what stirred that?
Again, I think it was probably reading stuff, and probably back then it was watching the odd sort of, you know, show on television that had lawyers in it. I don't know. At Crown Court, I used to love watching when I wasn't at school in the afternoons. But I read a lot as well, and that opened lots of different doors to different worlds for me, and still today opens doors to worlds I don't have any direct knowledge of. So again, I think for me it was my mum and dad were always, you should follow your dreams, you should, you know, do what you want, don't let anybody tell you you can't do things, even although I was wanting to do things they hadn't done and probably had no knowledge of. And I remember when I was at secondary school sort of trying to work out what I wanted to do, and going to see the guidance teacher, the careers advisor that you went to see at the time, and saying, I want to be a lawyer. And I remember vividly this woman saying to me, I don't think, you know, people from this school probably don't do things like that. And she suggested I should go and be a teacher instead, as if being a teacher was somehow less of a career than a lawyer. And the way I was, a bit like Val, maybe just a bit bloody-minded and sort of stubborn, I thought, well, I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm not going to accept that I can't do that. But for every young person, I guess, back then that reacted like that, there probably was another two that said, okay, well, fair enough, I'll go and do something else. So I guess what I would say to you, above anything else, is never, ever, ever let somebody say to you, you can't do something. If you think you're good enough and you're prepared to work hard enough at what you want to do, then be determined that you're going to do it. And
you can, you know, even when the odds are against you, you can turn things round. When I wanted to go to university, you know, back in those days, the received wisdom at Kirkcaldy High School was if you were really smart, you went to Edinburgh or St Andrews University. If you weren't quite so smart, you went to Dundee or Stirling. I'm not saying that to cast aspersions on those universities, but that was the received wisdom. And then at the end, when you got your degree, you came back to Fife. And I had this burning desire to be a writer. That was what I wanted to be. And I felt different. I felt like an outsider, and all sorts of reasons for that. But the thing that drove me was that I really wanted to escape, I suppose, and have wider horizons. And I didn't know anything about English universities except what I had read in the Shalley School books. And in the Shalley School, they went to one of three places. They either went to the Sorbonne in Paris, and I knew that my French wasn't good enough for that, or they went to Oxford University, or they went to the Kensington School of Needlework. Now, I knew I wasn't going to the Kensington School of Needlework.
I think that was a wise choice.
I think it was a very wise choice. I can still barely sew on a button. And so I decided I was going to go to Oxford University. I knew nothing about Oxford. I knew nothing much about England. I mean, we'd been to Blackpool for a holiday for a week once, you know, so that really set me up for the dreaming spires of Oxford. And I decided I was going to apply for Oxford University. So I went to Kirkcaldy High School guidance person and said, I want to go to Oxford. And they laughed. And they said, you know, you're not going to Oxford. Don't be ridiculous. People like us don't go to Oxford. And I said, well, I want to do the entrance exam. And they said flat out, no, we're not going to support you in that because we don't think you'll get in, and that will reflect badly on the school. But I was determined, and I went off and I found out what you had to do to get into Oxford, which was basically you sat an entrance exam, and if you did well enough, you had to go to Oxford for an interview. So I decided I was going to do this. I had one teacher, my English teacher, Wilf Alsop, who totally believed in me, and actually was himself an ex-footballer, had played for Hearts in his youth. But Wilf gave me extra tuition in bits of English course that weren't covered in England, that weren't covered in the Scottish syllabus, because they did a different syllabus. And he gave up free periods, tutored me in that, and the school still wouldn't invigilate me for the entrance exam, which had to be formally invigilated. So in the end, I persuaded the librarian to lock me in a room off the library so that I couldn't get out and cheat. And I did the entrance exam. And then I went off to Oxford with my cardboard suitcase. I had my interviews, and I went interviews with the tutors in that particular subject. And then I had an interview with the principal. And she said, we've never taken anyone from a Scottish state school before. And because I was gallus and 16, I just said, well, it's about time you started. And I think that more than anything is what got me in, because I was honest and I was direct and I didn't pretend to be something I wasn't. I just showed myself in all my lovely 5 colours. As she also said, we've never taken anyone as young as you before. What would you say if we said, have a gap year and come back? You see, back in those days, gap years didn't really exist. And if I'd had a year out, I would just have spent a year working in the station hotel, waiting on tables. And I didn't really think that was going to prepare me very well for going to Oxford. So I just said, well, I'll go someplace else then. I think they're not entirely accustomed to people saying, well, just go someplace else. And so those things combined, I think it's so. I mean, really, this is not about me bigging myself up. This is me saying to you, if you want something, don't be shy. Don't be shy to go for it, and don't be shy to be yourself. Because if you try to pretend to be somebody else, you'll get caught out very soon. So if you're absolutely sincere about who you are and what you want, that is the best way always to get there. You won't always succeed. We've all had moments of failure where we're sat there feeling really stupid. Well, I have anyway. I'm not so sure about it.
Almost every day. But the other lesson, I think, is persevere and don't give up. And even if you're terrified inside about something, you know, just believe in yourself. I remember when I went to Glasgow University to study law, even though the careers advisor told me it was not possible. But my first few months at university were not the happiest time of my life. I went from a state school in Irvine in Ayrshire, and in the law school in Glasgow University, in my first year, I was surrounded by all of these young people who'd been to private schools in Glasgow, and they just all seemed physically bigger than me. They were definitely posher than me. And they all just seemed so much more confident and cleverer than I was. And I spent the first few months thinking, I don't belong here, actually. That guidance teacher was right. This is not for me. But I didn't want to give up. So I decided I was going to get to Christmas and then see how I felt then. And of course, just before Christmas, we had exams. And then when we got the results of the exams, it turned out I'd done as well as, if not actually better than, some of these privately educated people who were kind of just being confident because that's how they'd been, you know, taught to be. It didn't mean they were cleverer, but it took me those few months to work that out. That just because they sounded more confident and sounded cleverer didn't actually mean that they really were. So don't give up. If you believe you can do something, or if you believe you really want to do something, then persevere at it and give it your all. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, and you'll go on to do something else. You know, everybody tries things that don't work, and people make mistakes or take wrong turns. But if you believe that it's what you want to do, then just give it your best shot and don't let any posh private school person put you off. Some of them were very nice as well, I should say. But
I mean, for me, going to Oxford was a huge culture shock. I mean, the first thing was that they didn't understand what I was saying, because I come from Fife. And I used to speak real...
Sorry, I don't understand that now either, Dad. Do you all understand that?
We're just sitting here together, you decame what I'm saying, eh?
Right, okay. Can somebody translate for me?
And that was I went off to Oxford speaking like that, Ken. And I went for my first tutorial and I started reading out my essay, and my tutor stopped me and said, I'm terribly sorry, Miss McDermid, I really haven't understood a word you've said. Might we go back to the beginning again, and perhaps a little more slowly this time? So I realised that the first thing I had to do was learn to speak English, which is why I now have what my partner calls a BBC Radio 4 Scottish accent. But I was determined I wasn't going to be knocked back by something that I could change. Everything was different. You know, the food was different. You know, I mean, back in the 1960s in Scotland, we only had 3 vegetables, you know. They were always putting things in front of me. I didn't know if it was a table decoration or food. And it kind of came to a head one night, my first term, when we went to an Italian restaurant. And you'll find this hard to believe, but in the 1960s, early 70s, we didn't really have pasta in Fife. There was spaghetti hoops, but that was about it. And so I'm looking at this menu and I'm thinking, I don't know what any of these things are. And then I got to think, pizza. I thought, I know what pizza is. So I ordered a pizza. And this round flat thing came with, you know, tomatoes and cheese and vegetables on the top. And I'm looking at it, I said, that's not pizza. And the waiter's going like, of course it's a pizza. What do you mean it's not a pizza? I said, because it's not a pizza. He said, well, what's a pizza? I said, a pizza's half moon-shaped and covered in batter. Because that was all I'd ever seen in the pizza in the chip shop. But those are stumbling blocks. Those are just wee things, and you just grit your teeth and go like, well, that's another lesson learned. In England, they have funny pizzas.
But I think that's something I think Scottish people generally down the generations have had to kind of overcome a bit. You know, that we think our accents are, you know, a bit inferior, and we're made to feel, because you turn on the telly and it's all these sort of BBC English accents you hear. But that's changing a little bit as well. But I think it is really important, I think, just to find what it is you kind of really want to do, or the difference you want to make, whatever that is, play football, whatever it is, and just, you know, find the kind of strength within yourself to keep going, because you'll hit barriers all the time. I mean, you know, my first few months at university I've spoken about, but you know, in politics, my goodness, I've got, you know, when I was starting out in politics, there weren't a lot of women in politics. Certainly weren't a lot of women from my kind of background in politics, and you got patronised, treated a bit differently. Women in politics today still get treated a bit differently to men. You know, you're judged differently. You know, you're judged on the basis of what you wear and how you look, not just on what you say. So you're constantly having to try and overcome these barriers, and you know, you've got to find the kind of strength and resilience to keep going. And I'm sure the training for being football players gives you a good grounding in that.
I think one of the other really important things is to find somebody who can be a model for you, somebody who could be a good mentor for you. So often it starts off as somebody you admire, somebody that's doing the kind of thing you want to be doing, and you see them doing it, and you kind of watch them. I remember Sarah Paretsky, a very successful American crime writer, once saying to me, you know, like, that the secret is to hang out with successful people and watch what they do. And that's a thing to learn, is watch how other people conduct themselves in the field that you want to be in. And when you see people doing something that you admire and you think, yeah, I could do that, you kind of steal it for your own armoury to get you to the next step. But as I say, the other thing is finding somebody that you can talk to, that you can ask, what's the next thing I should do? What am I doing wrong here? What should I be doing right here? Can you help me? And I think because now there are a lot more women in positions of power, and not just in politics or not just in the field of the arts, but any field that you go into professionally, women have now reached a point where almost everywhere you look, there are women who have already climbed the ladder, and almost always there are women who will help you up the next step of the ladder. It's not a crime to say, I don't know what to do here, can you help me? And over my time, there's been often times when I've turned to someone and said, I don't know how to do this. How do I do this? How do I sit on a committee, or you know, whatever? And over the years, I've not been afraid to ask for help, but I've also not been afraid to give help when somebody's come to me saying, how do I do this? What's the next step? Yeah. And one of the things I'm very conscious of is helping new writers at the start of their career to find their way in this world of books. And so, you know, I'll give them advice. I'll give them a blurb for their book, you know, sentence on the front of their book to say how good I think it is, if I think it's good. But all of those things, it's a two-way street now, and that's a two-way street that has really become much more populated than when we were starting out.
Totally. I mean, there's so many more role models for girls now. I mean, you're footballers. You know, a few years ago, you wouldn't have been able to look to anybody really as a role model, or very, very few people. Now, well, there's a whole team that's played in a World Cup. There's household names that you know, our footballers in the women's games. You've got people to look to, as Val was saying earlier on, looking at how they conducted themselves on the pitch in that really, you know, terrible match where they got robbed. So do that, and also help. It's never too early in your life to lend a hand to a pal that you maybe think needs a bit of advice or help. And the other thing I would say to you is, if people, and the more you progress in any walk of life and in any career, the more you'll find people that want to bring you down as well as help you. Mm-hmm. People that will want to criticise you and have a go at you. And usually that's from people who are jealous of what you're achieving because they're not doing it themselves. And so you've got to really steel yourself against that and don't let that get into your head. And I think your generation probably has that a bit tougher maybe than ours did, because social media. We grew up at a time before Facebook and Twitter and all of that.
We barely had telephones.
Well, I'm a bit younger. I had a telephone, but
my parents didn't get a telephone until I went to university, so that they could phone me up and harangue me when I was at the other end of the country.
Well, we had a telephone, but it was still in the days where you had to wait till after 6 to phone until you get the cheap rate. So you lot have no idea what we're talking about.
No. Well, we're talking about cassette tapes in a minute, and then they'll be completely lost.
Absolutely. But that's the thing. There's lots more avenues for people to kind of have a go at you and criticise you. I remember before the World Cup talking to Shelley Kerr, the manager of the team, and she was kind of asking about, you know, how you cope with if they have a bad performance on the pitch and they're getting hammered with people on social media. So you've just got to, again, I keep coming back to this, but throughout my whole life it's been really important, and it's easier said than it is done, because, you know, all of us, including me, every day you have moments of self-doubt. Am I really up to this? Am I good enough for this? Am I capable of this? Mm-hmm. But you've really got to find that thing within yourself that you think, no, actually, I am good enough for this, and believe in yourself. And a lot of it comes down to self-belief. Yeah.
And the mute button is a wonderful thing.
On Twitter, it's
a great thing on Twitter, because when you block someone, it gives them the satisfaction of knowing they've got to you. When you mute them, they don't know you've muted them, so they're just shouting into the dark.
Of course, we're probably, this is probably to this lot a bit like talking about the days before the telephone. They're probably on to the next thing after Twitter just now. We are kind of stuck in the social media art. Who was you, before you were a writer at school, when you were deciding you wanted to go to Oxford, were there people in your life, apart from you talked about your parents, but were there others that kind of motivated you, performed that sort of role model?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, my big cousin, Senga,
clearly for Fife,
who left school after her hires and refused to go to university. Because everybody told her she should go to university, and she wanted to be a nurse. And she went off and she became a nurse, and she did very well in nursing. And then after a few years in nursing, she became a nursing sister, and then she decided she wanted to go to university. And she went off to university and she did a degree in social science at Strathclyde, and she ended up as a professor at Newcastle University, professor of nursing research. And she just went her own way, and I loved that determination. She wasn't going to do either what her parents wanted or what the school wanted. She was going to do what she wanted, and I learned a lot from that. And incidentally, one of the best things about my cousin Senga is that she's married. She married a man called Bond. And she got a CBE, which is a Commander of the British Empire. So my cousin Senga is actually Commander Bond, which I just love. What about you?
I mean, at school, there was a couple of teachers that were really important to me. My modern studies teacher in particular, who Mr. Kelso, and he always encouraged me to kind of, stick with it. And back then I was also getting a sort of interest in politics, even though I wanted to go to university to study law, and that was an even sort of weird, for most of my friends, you're involved in politics, you're joining a political party. That was really weird, and not a lot of my teachers kind of understood that. So he was somebody that always encouraged me, and always took time to speak to me about it and sort of have conversations and debates. So he was really important. But for me, the biggest inspirations and motivations in my life were my mum and dad. My mum was very young when I was born, so I think she always wanted to see me have the opportunities that maybe she hadn't had, and so was always kind of pushing me along. And always allowed me to make mistakes as well. I think it's also a very working class thing, maybe a very Scottish thing, where you feel as if, you know, you should be ashamed of making mistakes or getting things wrong or mucking things up. And actually that's a really important part of developing, of being able to get things wrong and learn from it. And I don't think we do that well enough.
Yeah, it's good in a way. It's good to fail quite early on, actually.
It doesn't feel good at the time.
It doesn't feel good at the time, no.
It is good.
But it's quite good to learn the lesson of failure at some point, quite early on, because sooner or later you will fail. And the earlier you learn what that feels like, and you pick yourself up and start all over again and determine that you're never going to feel like that again, is a real spur. But when failure comes later, it's much harder to deal with, it's much harder to process.
But it is so important. I mean, in politics, I had fought and lost loads of elections before I ever won an election, and it was all, and it's a bit like failure in any walk of life, it was every single experience of that was really devastating. I just felt as if the world had ended and I would never get over it and never recover from it. But then you find that as time passes, you learn more from these experiences often than you learn from the successes, and you learn what to do differently. And I think without those experiences, I would never have gone on to do what I'm doing now.
And people look at us, where we are now and what we've achieved, and all they see is the achievement. They don't see, you generally don't see people talking about the failures. You don't see that public side of the bits where we've gone home and felt useless and hopeless and that we're never going to get this right. And really, how am I going to get up in the morning and do all this again?
And
but
that's
we've all been there, and that's life.
And I think particularly, I did an interview a couple of months ago now where I was asked, do I ever suffer from impostor syndrome? Now, I don't know if anybody's heard, and that's basically what I just talked about a moment ago, where you think, oh no, I'm going to get found out, I'm not really good enough for this, you know, I shouldn't be doing this job because I don't have what it takes, and someday will find me out. And I said, yeah, I do. You know, I have periods where I doubt myself, I doubt, what I'm doing, I doubt the decisions I'm making. And after that interview, I got so many people contacting me saying that they were amazed to look at somebody like me and hear me say that, because they just assume, they see people in positions like mine, they see people as successful as Val and just think it's all been plain sailing and you must be super confident and somehow exceptional. Yeah. You aren't. We're just human beings, and you have the same doubt and the same challenges and the same dreadful days as everybody else.
And I look at it, I'm sure you do the same, you look around at other people doing in your world doing the same kind of thing as you and say, she knows what she's doing.
Yeah, exactly.
He knows what he's doing. I've got a Scooby what I'm doing here.
Yeah.
And you have to understand that that's what everybody feels at some time or another. We all feel that moment where you're thinking, everybody else knows what they're doing here, and I just don't know what I should be doing, and I'm going to get found out today. Yeah,
and it is, I don't want to sort of overstate the kind of gender card here, but I think women suffer from that much more than men. Women always underestimate their abilities. Men, now this is, sorry to the men in the room, because not all men are the same, obviously, but generally speaking, men overestimate their responsibilities. And I'm not here to be political, but I saw a great example of that when a certain Prime Minister came to see me earlier this week. But,
it's true.
Yeah, you'll get people, guys who it will never cross their minds that they're not up to it when everybody else is looking at them thinking, you're not really up to this. Whereas with women, it's the opposite.
There's been research done to this about job applications, that men will apply for jobs that they're really not qualified for because they think, yeah, I could do that. And women will not apply for jobs that they're actually overqualified for because they think, not sure if I could manage that.
Yeah, or I could do most of it, but I might not be able to do that wee bit of it, so they don't go for it.
Don't be scared.
Yeah.
Don't be scared of things that look like a difficult mountain to climb, because you know what? The other people who are going for that same job or position in a team or whatever, they're feeling just the same as you. They're feeling just as insecure and just as scared as you are.
Yeah, and stretch yourself. Actually, and this is something that took me quite a long time to kind of really embrace properly, is put yourself into positions where you feel a bit terrified, that you think that you might fail, that you might not be up to it. And test yourself, stretch yourself, do things that you know, are a bit out of the ordinary, maybe, that you feel you might not be ready for, because you'll learn a lot from experiences like that.
What's the hardest thing that you do on a semi-regular basis?
Get up in the morning, I think. What's the hardest thing on a daily basis? For me, I suppose the hardest thing generally is that most of what I do is in the kind of public eye. So when I fail or get it wrong, which I do, like everybody does, it's very, very public, and the sort of the consequences of that and the criticism for that is very public, and that can be, you know, even for somebody like me who's been doing it for a long time, that can be quite tough. And then beyond that, I think the toughest thing in a job like mine is that people look to me. I'm the First Minister. I'm, you know, the most senior politician in the country. There's this sense that you should be able to fix everything and make anything happen. And you can't always do that. And often that's the most difficult thing, of explaining to people and trying to make people understand why, you know, being First Minister doesn't come with a magic wand, that it can be difficult to make things happen.
See, I was hoping you could come round and fix my boiler after this, you know.
I couldn't, but I'll send Peter.
Yeah. And we've all got those things in our lives that we just look at and we feel a sense of absolute dread. We've got to do them, but you just have to do them, because they're both of us, I think, have jobs that have got a lot of really fulfilling and fun aspects to them, things that just you get a great feeling from doing. And the downside of that is that you have to do the things that absolutely terrify you.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in politics for 30 years now. I've been doing live television interviews, I'm making speeches, and people often ask me, do I still get nervous before I make a speech or do a television interview? And the answer is absolutely. And the day I don't get nervous about something like that is probably the day I will fall flat in my face, because you need that. You need to be pushing yourself to do the best you can, and that's where the nerves come from. You're kind of scared that you'll mess it up, and that makes you work harder to make sure that you don't, or try to make sure that you don't. Yeah. So embrace the kind of nerves and the terror of situations that you might find yourselves in.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's every time I sit down to start a new book, I want every book I write to be better than the books I've written before, or at the very least different from anything I have done before. And I exist in a state of terror for about 3-4 months every year, terror and self-doubt that this book is not going to achieve what I need it to achieve, and people are going to suddenly find me out and go, oh, that book was really rubbish. You know, I remember sitting down one summer's evening, lovely summer's evening by the sea in a nice pub with a friend of mine who's also a writer, nice glass of beer, watching the sea. And I was struggling a bit with the book that I was working on at the time, and I really was having difficulty with one aspect of it. I just couldn't get it to gel, I couldn't get it to make sense. And I was telling him about this, and he took a long swallow of his pint and he said, well, the thing is, when you write as much as we do, the chances of writing a completely rubbish book are much higher, don't you think? And I thought, that's really not what I wanted to hear right now.
No. And do you get nervous when your book's published, when it goes to the reviewers and until you see the reviews?
Yes, yes. I want everybody to love it, but and I don't want them to notice the faults in it, because by the time it comes out, I know where all the faults are. I know what the flaws are. You know, it's when you come to read a book at a reading, and even though you've worked on it for a while and you've done some revisions and you've done your proofreading, and then you're reading it out and you start reading out this sentence and you think, this is a terrible sentence. So yeah,
it's a bit late.
So, bit late, absolutely late. It's too late. Nothing you can do about it. You know.
Anyway, I'm a big fan of Val's books, so I would recommend them, and they do get better with each one.
Thank you.
I'm such a sook as well.
So you should start at the very beginning and work your way through them, because you'll just go treat after treat.
They start excellent, okay, because I realised that could be, that last statement could be misconstrued.
She started off a bit rubbish, but
they start excellent and they just become superlatively so.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there's that every time that feeling of self-doubt afflicts me, and it's really difficult. Some days it's just sitting staring at the screen and just thinking, I can't do this. This is the book where they find me out that I can't do this. But as you say, you just have to go on. And there's the Irish poet W.B. Yeats talked about the fascination of what's difficult, and I think that's something to hold on to. challenge yourselves, push yourselves. Don't be satisfied with where you are. Always aim for where you want to be. Because the next step is always the most important one. And it's always the hardest one too. Many years ago, I met Ruth Rendell, who was was one of the queens of crime of the generation before me. You might have seen some of her television series over the years. But she was at an extraordinary work rate. She used to write 3 books every 2 years, 3 books every 2 years. And I met her very early on. I was a baby writer, and she was one of my heroes. And I stood there and I said, what do you say after you've said, I love your books, I think you're wonderful, I think you're amazing, you've been an inspiration to me. And so I said, I suppose when you've written as many books as you have, it gets easier. And she looked at me as if I was very slow and very stupid and said, no dear, it gets harder. And I didn't understand that at the time, but I understand it now, because the more you do something and the better you get at it, the more you want to challenge yourself to go further, to be the best.
That's it. I mean, it's a great cliche, and again, in any walk of life, it's not the easy things that give you most satisfaction. It's when you do something hard that takes you outside your comfort zone, or you feel you do something that, you know, you've done a bit better than you did it the last time. That's what really gives you satisfaction. That's what drives you on to do
and that's
more.
what keeps you, keeps you sticking at things.
Yeah.
You have to practice things. I mean, with football, you have to train, you have to practice, you have to practice again and again and again before you get it right. And that's just like what it is for me. Writing books, it's like anything. You play a musical instrument, you play the cello, you start off, you can't play a single note, and then you become Julian Lloyd Webber. So these things take time and take practice, and it's not to be downhearted when things don't work the first time.
Yeah, I also take some pleasure actually in proving people wrong, and maybe it's the kind of line of work I'm in, where you've constantly got journalists and opposition politicians sort of saying, "Oh, you won't do this," or "You can't do this," or "You're doing it wrong," and then trying to prove people wrong, confound people, and it's one of the motivations I think that helps in some of the tough times. What's the single piece of advice you would give this group here?
A single piece of advice I would give is what I said right at the beginning. Don't let anybody tell you you can't do things. Don't let anybody take your dreams away from you.
Yeah, that would be mine as well. Don't let if you think you're good enough and you're prepared to work hard enough, because success doesn't come easily. You've got to work at it, and you've got to, as Val said, practice. But if you think you're good enough, if you're prepared to put in the work, then don't let anybody tell you you can't do it, and follow your dreams. And the sky is the limit if that is what you do.
And we will look forward to seeing you playing for Scotland.
Absolutely.
I'm sure there'll be at least one person in this room who will achieve that, probably more if you work hard at it.
And we will have sorted out the referees by the time you're in the World Cup.
Certainly will.
Val and I will be there to sort of kneecap them if
I hope
they try that again.
When you look back and see what you've achieved and where you are now, would there be anything you change?
Well, that's a really good question. I don't know that there would be anything I would change about, what actually I did and the sort of journey my career has taken. I think there's things I would change about myself. I would say to myself, if I was talking to my kind of younger self now, would be to lighten up a bit and maybe not take myself so seriously, because I was quite serious and sort of intense when I was younger, which is a good thing, but I think I would have benefited maybe from just being not working any less hard, but maybe just being in myself a bit more, prepared to sort of see, the sort of lightness of things. So I would tell myself to laugh a bit more. Maybe, not work is hard, but maybe relax a bit as well.
I think you've got the hang of that now, a wee bit.
Aye, only when I'm being led astray.
Were you interested in football as a young girl?
Not really. Well, that's not true. I was never interested in playing football because, as I said earlier on, it was never something really that crossed my mind as a girl that girls could do. I remember the the World Cup back in the late 1970s when Scotland went to the World Cup. Ali MacLeod, we were on the march with Ali's army. And I remember that being really exciting. It was exciting because Scotland was in a World Cup and we convinced ourselves we were going to win the World Cup back then. But also my dad, I sort of referred to being excommunicated by my dad if I wore a Raith Rovers top. My dad's an avid, passionate Ayr United supporter, and the manager of Scotland at the time, Ali MacLeod, was a big Ayr United sort of legend as well. So my dad was really kind of into the World Cup then. So I remember that, and as I say, my dad used to take me to the football when I was younger. So I was interested in watching it, but I never, ever contemplated playing football. Did you ever think about playing?
I would have loved to play if I'd been able to. Yeah. I mean, I played hockey because I couldn't play football. You know, kind of football was in my blood from the beginning, and Raith Rovers was in my blood from the beginning because my dad used to bring me to Starks Park when I was wee. My dad was a scout for the club, and so I didn't just get to come to Starks Park on occasion. I used to have to stand in the rain with him watching, you know, teams of miners and shipyard workers kicking 7 bells out of each other on a Sunday afternoon. And my dad's greatest claim to fame is that he signed a player called Jim Baxter, who was probably the greatest footballer Scotland has ever produced. He played for Raith Rovers for 18 months before he went on to Glasgow Rangers, and great things for Scotland. And that's why in Kirkcaldy, to your parents and your grandparents' generation, it doesn't matter how many books I write, I will still only ever be Jim McDermid's lassie.
Val, are you available at 3 p.m. on Saturday against Dumbarton?
Well, I think I would be no worse than some of the guys the way they've been playing this season. Yes.
Who inspired Nicola to first become interested in politics and economics?
I don't really know where the inspiration for politics first came from. It's something that just was in me, and from a very young age I was really kind of just curious about the world around me and the politics of my community. I suppose in a kind of negative way, the person who inspired me to get involved in politics was Margaret Thatcher when she was Prime Minister, because she was devastating communities like mine, communities like many of the mining communities in Fife, and that made me angry what she was doing, so that kind of motivated me to get involved. Once I was involved in the SNP, there were a number of people that helped me and encouraged me and inspired me, but one in particular, the first election I ever campaigned in, she was the candidate where I grew up. Her name is Kay Ulrich, and I went out to campaign for her, and she was and is a real character. So she really helped to motivate me and mentor me as well. So there's been lots of people along the way, but where, strangely enough actually, I only found out after I'd been involved in politics for years, I found out that my grandfather had been a member of the SNP way back in the 1960s. I didn't know anything about this. That when my gran died, going through stuff, an old membership card was found amongst old papers. So there maybe was something in the genes all along.
Val, where do your ideas for your novels come from? Do you come up with stories, or are you inspired by people or places that you see?
Ideas for books come often from very strange sources. There's no one thing that I can specifically pinpoint and say this is where always the ideas flow from. But except I suppose that it always starts with the words "what if." So sometimes somebody will tell me a wee anecdote, or I'll overhear something on the bus that will make me think, well, that's interesting. Or maybe read something in a magazine or something that makes me think, I wonder what would have happened if that had happened instead of this had happened. But once the idea starts, then I have to think about how this story is going to develop. And that's the point where I start deciding whose story it is. But also often that's the point where I decide where I'm going to set the story. Because sometimes the setting for a story is very important, and that can shape how the book develops and the tone of the book, how it feels when you're reading it. So, I mean, one of my novels, The Distant Echo, is set here in Fife mostly. And the idea for that came from a story that a friend of mine told me her son was a medical student at university, and he and his friends had been out drinking one Friday night and were coming back from the pub, and they came upon a young man being set on by a bunch of thugs. And because they were nice guys, they chased away the guys who were doing the beating up. Because they were medics and they seen the guy on the ground was really struggling, they went back to check that he was okay. And he was not in a good way. He was sort of bleeding and not very comfortable. And that was the point where the police arrived. And the police, of course, they see 3 young men smelling of drink, sweaty, blood on their hands, and they immediately assume that they're responsible. Now, luckily, the guy on the ground was conscious, and he was able to say to the police, no, these are not the bad guys, these are the good Samaritans. But I'm hearing this story and I'm thinking, what if the guy had been unconscious? What if the guy had been dead? And so that was the starting point for the book for me, and I knew I needed to set it somewhere. I wanted it to be a university town that was quite a small town, and the only place that made sense to me to do that in was St Andrews, and that's how the book came to be set where it is, and that was the starting point for the story that developed from that.
What's your favourite sport?
Oh, football. I should say I'm rubbish at all sports, so when I talk about favourite sports, I'm just talking about watching sport, not playing it. I do like football, and I've become a huge fan of women's football. I would put that up there as one of my favourite sports. I also like tennis. I've always enjoyed, since I was really, really young, watching Wimbledon, and obviously since Andy Murray's done as well as he's done, I've watched other tournaments as well. So I really enjoy watching tennis. So football and tennis. And obviously on Sunday when I'm watching Scotland play hockey, the answer to that question will be hockey.
Yeah, you probably need a quick refresher on the rules before you go.
I need I was definitely rubbish at hockey at school.
If you could choose any other job, what would it be?
A writer. No, seriously, when I was younger, not before, probably kind of in parallel to wanting to be a lawyer, I always had this idea that I wanted to write children's books. Now, I never pursued that, and I'm not sure I will ever do that, but I would, I love books and I love reading books, so, the idea of writing books always appealed to me, but I don't think I have the imagination or the talent that Val has to produce the kind of books she does.
No, you probably got what it takes, and it's never too late. I mean, all when I was growing up, I really wanted. If I couldn't be a writer, I wanted to be a musician. I wanted to be a rock star. I wanted to be
and now you're doing that.
And now I'm doing that, playing Glastonbury. So it's never too late.
What would you, if you weren't a writer and you weren't a musician, what would you want to do?
Well, I don't know. I think I'm essentially unemployable. And those are the only 2 things I've ever had a sort of burning desire to do.
That's just as well. You're pretty good at both of them then.
Thank you.
Nicola, have you faced any challenges working in a predominantly male environment? And if you have, how have you dealt with the challenges?
Oh yeah, I have. Probably almost every day of my working career, and the challenges take different forms. Not so much now in the position I'm in, but in my younger days, you would not be taken seriously or as seriously as a woman in politics, particularly as a young woman in politics. You just found that you were dismissed a bit too easily or patronised and not taken as seriously. So you have to battle to overcome that. You also had mentioned this a wee while ago, and this is still the case today. You are judged and treated differently as a woman in politics. I think as a woman in the public eye generally. And that's because most of the journalists that write about politicians are men. So they will be much more likely to write about what you're wearing. I mean, I tell the story when Theresa May became Prime Minister and came to a meeting with me in Glasgow, and we basically had a photograph taken sitting like this, and we both were wearing skirts, and the front page of the Daily Mail the next day was a headline that said, "Never mind Brexit, who won Legsit?" And this was a genuine who had so as a woman politician, that's what you face routinely. And that's, unfortunately, I would like to sit here and say that's getting better, but I'm not sure it is, actually. I think that women still face that. I think one of the things, and again, for any young woman going into politics, it would be advice. I think when you're surrounded, and this will be true in other predominantly male occupations, when you're surrounded by men, and largely middle-aged white men, you kind of unconsciously start to emulate their behaviours and how they go about things, because you think that's the way to be taken seriously. And what you learn in politics is that it's not. You just get this double whammy of criticism. You still don't get taken seriously, but you kind of get criticised for not being feminine enough as well. So be yourself is the answer to that. But there are challenges, and I think there are challenges today for women in politics or public life that I didn't face, and that largely comes from social media. The sort of toxic environment, a very misogynistic environment on social media, I think is an added challenge for women today. So I'd love to sit here and say, I mean, on one level, we've got a woman First Minister, we've had women Prime Ministers, so it's certainly possible for women to get to the top, but I can't sit here yet and say that there's not more challenges and more barriers for women, because unfortunately there still is, and we just have to keep battling to get over that.
2 more questions left. So this is for both of you. If you were a football player now, what position would you play or would you want to play?
I spent my years in hockey playing in goal, and I'd probably go for being a goalkeeper, because I like that the way you have to completely absorb the game, completely watch the game, get the sense of what's happening, and always being on the qui vive, always being ready. I loved playing in goal. I loved being the last line of defence.
Striker. I think it's kind of, it's a politician being kind of in the limelight and, sort of going for glory. I definitely want to be a striker, I think.
Last but definitely not least, I'd like to thank 2 incredible women, Val McDermid and Nicola Sturgeon. We realise you're both very busy people, so we really appreciate you taking the time to come and speak to us this evening. Tonight has been very inspiring, and we've learned lots of valuable lessons about becoming strong, successful females. Thank you. Thank you.
Forgive me. Although we're not in the same league at the moment.
Don't start. Just don't start.
Okay, sorry. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for making us so welcome. Thank you.